Welcome to DunnWise Perspectives, a podcast about stories of resilience and shifting mindsets. I'm your host, Doris Dunn. My guests are leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday people who've navigated change, faced uncertainty, and discovered new ways of thinking when life didn't go according to plan. If you're navigating a season of change, feeling stuck, or simply curious about how small mindset shifts can lead to meaningful progress, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the DunnWise Perspectives podcast, where we talk to very interesting people with very interesting stories, and today is no different. I'm excited to introduce Kristina Pollard to the podcast today, and I met Kristina through a mutual connection. And Kristina and I only met a few months ago, and it was as a result of someone else that said, these two ladies need to meet. Kristina's got a great story, and I had the opportunity to hear some of the story. But let's start with an introduction. Please tell our audience all about you, Kristina.
Well, hello, and it is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on your show. I'm Kristina. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I've been a gypsy a little bit over the years. I'm from London, England, moved to California at a very young age. Once I was in my 30s, I navigated from California all over the Pacific Northwest, and about 5 years ago moved here to Knoxville. Worked in a professional environment most of my life. I would say I'm a very social person, and there's a lot of layers to me.
Yes.
I guess it'd take a long time to answer.
There are a lot of layers, and let's start digging into some of those layers. And the reason that your story is so interesting is, we'll just go ahead and rip off the Band-Aid. You suffered with addiction.
I did. Yeah.
And that's in the past tense, which is really good news. But I want to get into your addiction story.
Sure.
And tell us, what did you get addicted to? What happened? Tell us that story.
I was in my 20s, and I would say that I was probably prone to addiction from an early age. I had a snowboarding accident. We used to go on snowboarding trips a lot, and this was at the height of the opioid epidemic, and went to a doctor and got prescribed prescription medication and got put on a lot of painkillers that I very quickly began to abuse. And it wasn't just painkillers at that point, it was whatever the doctors wanted to give me. And I started a relationship with multiple doctors of doctor shopping, and that is how my addiction started, and it evolved over about 8 years.
A lot of us are born with either we can become easily addicted to something or not so easily addicted. It seems like it passes on to generations.
Yeah.
And I know people whose fathers were addicts. In fact, we had someone on our podcast whose father was an alcoholic. He became an alcoholic. So you hear these stories pretty frequently. Mm-hmm. Go back in time, and you said that you probably had an inclination to be addicted to drugs or alcohol before the accident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why do you say that?
And very similar to what you're talking about is the generational curse, I guess we could call it, of addiction. My grandmother was an alcoholic. My dad was a high-functioning alcoholic. He no longer drinks. I would also include the circumstances of my childhood and growing up. I was very hyper-aware at a very young age, and maybe even had some empath abilities that allowed me to feel the room and to absorb the emotions of people. And that was a lot to handle. Coming across a medication that is being prescribed professionally by a doctor, it numbed some of that out. It numbed a lot of that out.
Did you have some addiction tendencies before that? Before the opioids, maybe with alcohol, or when you were in that room and you noticed the emotions and it became too much, what did you do in those situations?
I wouldn't say that there was any one thing at that point that gripped me. But starting at the age of 16, I smoked pot. I had alcohol on multiple occasions before graduating high school. I had many parties at my house when my parents would go out of town. And it was just living that rebellious lifestyle that was chasing the next high, whether it was a substance or whether it was just reckless behavior.
So you said reckless behavior. What were some of the reckless behaviors? And I'm not going to count snowboarding because that's maybe you went a little overboard on snowboarding. But when you say reckless behavior, what was some of that? And I guess that's thrill seeking, probably.
Yeah, I got arrested at 14 for shoplifting. That was probably my first incident. And just reckless in the sense that I would jump off a cliff if somebody dared me to. I was hanging out with a lot of skaters, and back in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, that was that culture at the time, was get stoned, go skateboarding. I can recall us having an air of anarchy to us. Just if somebody said don't do it, we said watch me do it. It was just a rebellious behavior that did not lend well to growing up and being a mature individual.
Yeah. What do you think caused that rebellious behavior? What happened in your childhood that made you want to rebel?
My parents got divorced at a very young age. When I was at a very young age, we had just moved here from London, England. And my parents, I think my father was already having an affair at the time before we had moved here. We moved to California, and I remember lots of fights. I remember one incident where my brother and I were in the bathtub and my parents had a really big fight, a big blowout, and my dad left. And I was 4 years old, and I remember the feeling of loss, that he might never come back. That's what it felt like to me, and it felt like abandonment. And then as we progressed through the tragedies of divorce and a broken home, my brother became the golden child that always got good grades. My mom relied on him a lot to be a father figure. Even though he's only 18 months older than me, my mom leaned on him to be the mature man of the house when he was just a child. And of course, I couldn't live up to that standard. And so my default setting just went to becoming the black sheep. And if I can't be as good as my brother, then I'm just going to do this and enjoy what I'm doing and have fun and not care about what anybody else said or thought.
Oh, wow. That's a lot to put on both of you. That's a lot to put on him, a lot to put on you. Let's fast forward to that snowboarding accident and tell us about that. How bad were the injuries? And then how bad was the addiction? And at what point did you realize something's wrong and you've got to do something about it?
The accident wasn't super severe. I was on a snowboard and it was very snowy. It was like blizzard conditions. And if you know anything about skiing and snowboarding, the moguls are something that snowboarders don't like to go around because it's a very back and forth tiny little hills that you have to navigate through, which is for skiing. But because I couldn't really see where I was going, I hit the moguls and it shot me off into a tree. I hit the tree really hard and it had bulged a few discs in my spine. I made it back down the hill on my own and pretty much just sat in the lodge the rest of the weekend and had some hot chocolate with peppermint schnapps for the duration of my time. But when I got back, the pain was dull and it just lasted. It wouldn't go away. It just lasted forever. I worked at a pharmaceutical company at that time and we had incredible insurance. And I could just go to any doctor, and I did. I didn't have to be referred by my GP. I just went to a pain management doctor, and immediately they did some scans and basically approved me for taking 4 or 5 pills a day of
Oh, wow.
very strong narcotics. So, yeah, it was probably avoidable if I hadn't had such easy access to it.
Yeah, if you were in the pharmaceutical industry, you mentioned earlier that you could doctor shop. And when one doctor wasn't giving you enough, were you going to other doctors to get more? At some point, you must have realized, I actually am getting addicted to this. How many doctors did you see? And at what point did you say, ooh, I've got to do something? Or was there another incident that
No, I would say it
triggered
was
it?
progressive. And for many years, it was just the one doctor, but I was really good at manipulating him. I could hold a job. I still had a very professional job, and I didn't fit the mold of an addict when I would go into the office, but I would use my feminine wiles to get what I wanted, flirting. I would say a lot of times that this medication isn't working anymore. Let's try something new. But really, it was because I ran out of my medication early, and I just needed something so that I didn't feel the withdrawals. But I did notice probably within the first year or two that I was physically addicted, that I couldn't sleep without it. I could barely get through my day without it because I would feel the withdrawal symptoms, which felt like the flu, and it was awful.
What triggered the realization that you needed to do something different, that you had to get off of these opioids?
I remember one day I called in sick because I ran out of medication, and I was able to later that day get another prescription from my doctor. But I think I just had that aha moment of I cannot keep doing this. I just can't. So I think a few weeks later, I had called my doctor and asked to get put on Suboxone, which is what it was very new at the time. And that is what they use very regularly to get people off of opioids, including heroin. But that medication is even more addictive and harder to get off.
Really?
It is so hard to get off. That was almost impossible, and why I went to rehab years later, because I just couldn't do it on my own. It stays in your system so long that it took me about 6 months to start feeling normal again.
I'm so sorry about that. Now, I know that before we hit record, you did share another incident that happened, that you were arrested when you were 14 for shoplifting, but you were arrested for something a little bit more severe later. How was that related with your addiction? And share that story with us.
So again, the addiction was progressive, and I went through a relationship that was pretty toxic, and it caused a lot of anxiety. And the next medication that I was put on was Xanax to alleviate some of that anxiety. And that is where my addiction took the turn that led me into multiple arrests. I used to wake up in the middle of the night, not even knowing that I was awake, and I would get in my car and drive on Xanax because I just took so much of it. And I'd be blacked out the entire time, but I remember coming to on maybe 3 occasions where I had been arrested because I had driven my car under the influence, and one time drove off the road with my dogs in the car, by the way, which heartbreaking. Fortunately, nobody ever was injured. My parents probably have PTSD from all of the calls from the sheriff's department, from late night phone calls of, hey, got arrested, I need your help.
Tell me the story where you had the 3 days where you had some time to think about what was happening. Did you go through complete withdrawals, or how did you get off of all of the medications?
So in 2017, I decided it was time to leave California because my life had become unmanageable, and I figured if I changed geography, that was going to solve that problem, which we all know is not how the story ends. I moved to Oregon. My parents had moved there. My dad and my stepmom had moved to Oregon on the coast. And I asked if I could come and stay with them for a little while until I find a job, maybe in Portland or somewhere nearby. And they agreed. And I had sworn that I was not going to continue this pattern when I moved to Oregon. But it took about 2 weeks before I was back at a physician's office trying to get painkillers or Xanax or muscle relaxers or something, whatever they would give me. And I succeeded. And my stepmom found out about it, and she is no nonsense. She was not going to enable me. And so her and I got into a bit of a scuffle over my medication. She was trying to get it from me, and I was trying to keep it from her. And my dad came up behind me to try and restrain me. And as I threw my head back, I hit him in the nose, and his nose started bleeding. And the police were called, but because they're elderly, it was considered elderly abuse because there was a battery of sorts, and he was injured. And whether he wanted to file a restraining order or not, he legally had to. And I could go nowhere near them for a year. But I was put in jail for that arrest and taken to jail about an hour away from where they live because they're in a pretty remote part of Oregon. And I was put in a cell by myself and basically left alone for 3 days besides them bringing me food. And they don't tell you anything. It's not, hey, we'll be back in however long you're here for this long. Here's what you're here for. They don't care what information or don't know. And I didn't really even know what I was arrested for. And I was curious why I was left all alone and not allowed to go out into the general population area. But come to find out, when I was served with a restraining order, they said that I was a danger because of the type of arrest that I had, which was considered elderly abuse and battery. Yeah, I think I was allowed to go out of my cell for maybe 20 minutes one time. So within those 3 days, I had one book to read, and I had my thoughts and my prayers, and that was about it. And that is where the addiction ends. That is where I broke down and realized I've burned every bridge. I have nowhere to go. I have no job, no money, and now I have a restraining order from my parents, and I can't go anywhere near them. And so I was in prayer and just, Lord Jesus, you have got to help me out of this mess. And I remember hearing Adult and Teen Challenge, and that is a drug and alcohol recovery that is typically a 13-month program, and it's faith-based. And I had visited 2 campuses over the 2 years prior and thought, no way, my addiction is not that bad. I don't need a 1-year rehab. I can't do that. But there were no more trap doors in my bottom. I was at bottom, and that was it. I was not going to be homeless. That is not my story. Call it pride, call it whatever you want. That is never going to be a place that I would venture to, even in addiction. God willing, I say that now. But that point, that was something I never would have considered. And so when I heard Adult and Teen Challenge and remembered that there was one in town, I called them. And 2 days later, I was there. And that's where my story of recovery starts.
I love that. And I'm glad that you heard about them ahead of time so you knew it wasn't a complete strange name for rehabilitation,
Right.
that you knew enough to be able to trust them and realize this was where the journey needed to begin for rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And you were there a year and a half?
I was in the program for 13 months, and then I interned for a year in Montana. So I went from Eugene, Oregon, where I went through my program, and then in December of 2018, I moved to Montana and started an internship there, which was also another year.
When you say internship, you worked for them? You were an employee helping other people through their addictions?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
What is different about that program? I'm somewhat familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous and how that program works. And I know people that go to meetings every single week and they never miss those meetings. And they feel that it's important for their own rehabilitation that never ends, as well as helping other people that are new to the program. But when you are there 24/7 for 13 months, that must be a different environment. And
It is.
how does that program work? And what can, even for our listeners that aren't familiar with that type of program, if maybe they see themselves or a loved one that might need a program like that, how does that program succeed?
It is a nonprofit, so it's based off of whoever can afford to pay their tuition, which I don't even know what it was because I was a scholarship student there. And they do call patients or clients students because it's a discipleship program. It's learning how to live life on life's terms, but not on your own power. I was raised in the church and I definitely didn't feel the love of Christ in my early years through the church. It felt like a very legalistic, fear mongering kind of religion that I had no interest in. And then when I had to surrender, I had nowhere else to go, and I had to let some of that go. And whatever beliefs I had in my growing up and what I was taught, I had to let it go and just surrender to the program. It's a very controlling program because they want to make sure that you're not exposing yourself to triggers that might take you back to addiction.
Do they teach you, though, if those triggers do come back, if a trigger comes back, how to handle that trigger in a better and more upstanding way?
They do. When I was going through the program, they didn't have a therapeutic portion of it at the time. They do now. I feel like that was a piece that was lacking for me because I am somebody that I go very deep on things and I process things in layers, and the surface level type things aren't going to be enough for me. They really lean heavily on your relationship with Christ and realizing that you don't have to do it all on your own strength, that there is a higher power. And for your listeners too, if you're not a believer, we all have a higher power that we call on that is our inner strength. And we don't have to just keep tuckering down and pushing through something that isn't working without looking internally. Look internally, and your guide, whatever that might be for you, is so intuitive and helpful. At least it was for me. A lot of that program is very much centered around your curriculum and the Bible and just learning a new way of life, that if it didn't work for you, if your way didn't work for you, then try this. And if this doesn't work for you, then try something else. But it worked for me, and it worked for so many women in the program.
And how was it different when you were an intern helping other people? So that was another layer, another level of your own recovery, but at the same time helping others. How did that look different from the two programs, being totally immersed and then helping others?
I would say it was probably a game changer for me. When you stop focusing on yourself and you focus on other people and realize that there are conditions way worse than your own. Somebody's story has a much more tragic start, middle, or end than yours. And when you stop focusing on your own problems and you start lending a hand, it changes your heart posture.
Wow. Are there any stories you can share of where you helped someone else when you were the intern in Montana? Are there any stories that stand out to you as really impactful and where you made a difference? Obviously, don't share any names, but just the story itself.
It was my job to be in the trenches with these girls and with these women. Ages ranged from 18 to 60s, 70. And really just being able to share my testimony and what I had been through, being an ear just to listen to people, or just sitting and praying with them, distracting them from whatever it is that they're going through. There's so many of those stories. And there were so many stories that helped me in my own walk because of doing it as a family, being sisters in that environment and watching all of the other girls in the program also be there to support one another and be sacrificial and just love.
Wow. So after the program was over, you were done with your internship. How do you begin the rest of your life?
So my internship was about to end, and I was looking on the website for Adult and Teen Challenge to see if there were any positions that were available. And there was one that fit my skill set perfectly. So that was in Portland, Oregon. It was in the regional office of Adult and Teen Challenge, which managed 14 locations across the Pacific Northwest. And I applied for the job and I got it. And a month later, I was packing up my car and driving myself to Portland, Oregon to start my new life in January of 2020. And we all know what happened shortly after that.
Yes. I do want to ask, though, what was the relationship like with your father and your stepmother after the elder abuse situation?
Yeah.
And were you able to reconcile with them?
Yeah. So when I left my program as a student in Eugene, Oregon, there was a graduation ceremony and I invited them both to come, and they both did come. My dad had visited me a few times throughout the year as well. And so we were already building our relationship. It wasn't that our relationship was completely severed. We were talking all the time and he was incredibly supportive. It was just that legally there was a restraining order, and if anything had happened, I would have had to have gone back to jail if I was in his presence and something bad had happened. But nobody was reporting that because good things were happening in our lives.
Sure.
And we were working through some things. And then
did he recognize himself in you with his addiction issues? You said that he doesn't drink anymore.
Yes.
But was some of that forgiveness based on his realization that maybe he passed some of those genes on to you, and now here you are working through those addictions, especially as you graduate? I'm sure he was very proud of you for overcoming some of the same things he had to overcome.
And little did I know that the day that I went into the program, he quit drinking.
Oh.
So I guess I had inspired him. And when I graduated, I went and stayed with him for about a week before I moved to Montana. And that was when I found out that he had quit drinking. And he did say how proud he was and that I was the catalyst that got him to quit drinking. So, yeah, absolutely.
So he was grateful for that broken nose, probably.
Yeah.
There's a really good news story associated with that. And did your stepmother recognize that he had an issue as well? And she was grateful for all of it too, because now she had a husband and a stepdaughter that were both in recovery that were sober now.
Yeah. Yeah. And she started going to church the year that I was in the program. And she waited to get baptized until I was out of the program so that I could see that happen.
Oh my gosh. That is so special.
I know.
Okay, I'm going to start to cry now.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Pretty cool.
So, yes, you go back to Portland 2020. the world falls apart. How did that impact your job? They probably needed that center more than ever
They did. And it
after
didn't.
COVID.
I kept my job. I ended up running the entire development office, the fundraising office portion of the regional office. They did put a couple of the people who worked underneath me, they put them on a leave, and they went on unemployment at the time. So I was running the entire office myself, and I was going into the office every day, which was a saving grace. I think I would have gone nuts if I had to work remote or just be stuck at home all the time. And there were a lot of people that relapsed that year. Freshly graduated
there's a little joke in there that I don't want to get into on what happened in COVID, but a lot of people, I know that people drank a lot during COVID, and there were memes about it, but it honestly wasn't funny at all. If you really stop to think about it, it wasn't funny, and I'm sure your center helped some of those folks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a high population, but it always ebbed and flowed, always does. A year is a long time, and a lot of people come into the program also desperate, but they may not be ready, and they can leave on their own accord. It's not jail. You're free to go. There are some people who do go into the program, and they have court orders to be there, and that's, if they leave and get arrested, that's up to them to deal with. But it is a sanctuary, a safe haven for people who need it, and it saved my life, and I am forever grateful for it.
Yeah. Well, let's fast forward to today, and it's now well past your graduation, past COVID. What does life look like for Kristina today?
Life is glorious. Life is hard. There are some days where I'm like, Lord, does it always have to be this difficult? But I am somebody I'm a fighter. I have so much drive and ambition and just a renewed sense of strength that I get through every day. Every hard moment that I have, I remember that I don't have to do this all on my own. I have a community of amazing women, amazing friends, both men and women in my life. I don't think I've ever had such faith-filled people surrounding me in such a way that is just uplifting. I have a good career. I recently just resigned from my job and feel the Lord calling me to something new, and that I've applied for my own LLC and I'm starting my own business, and where that goes.
Yay, congratulations.
Thank you. Where that leads from here, I don't know, but I'm taking it one day at a time, one step at a time, one obedient yes at a time. And I'm thriving, and I could not be more happy.
That's amazing. That's so amazing. What do you hope that someone listening today takes away from this story?
I guess, like every addiction story, feels so hopeless. When you're in it, it feels like you're never going to be out of it. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. And it just takes strength, yes, but it just takes that one step. And I want people to know that there are resources out there, that you are not alone, that we have an internet full of data, that if you just simply do a Google search and try and find some kind of resource out there that might be able to help you, do it and take that step. It's bold. I was filled with fear. Trust me, there was so much fear in my heart when I went into a year-long faith-based program. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be the same person again. And granted, I'm not, but in a good way. That's not the person I thought I was going to come out being. But and
it took rock bottom for you to finally go in there. You had 2 other opportunities. You didn't think you were ready. You definitely were ready, but maybe you would have had a relapse if you did that.
Yeah.
But what about recognizing addiction in yourself? We just heard your story, and it took rock bottom for you to realize you were there. If you could wave a magic wand and help someone recognize that they are in need of not waiting until rock bottom before they do something, what would be, for our listeners, what would be something that they might not even notice that they are doing, that either someone else needs to notice it or they need to notice it, that shows a sign that they're going in the wrong direction and they're going to hit rock bottom?
I would say the number one thing for me was shame and trying to hide everything about myself. I didn't want people to see the truth of what I was doing, and I hid it. But people still noticed. People noticed that I took my purse with me to the bathroom, and I had these certain habits that I needed to go and sneak a pill here and there. And the isolation. If you find yourself alone because you don't want other people to see something, that might be a sign that you need to tell on yourself.
And what about people around us? If we're living with someone or we recognize those little purse habits in someone else, and I know you had a big fight with your stepmom, so it's not as easy as just taking the pills away from somebody, but what would be something that you could do for a loved one or a friend if you recognize that there is a problem with someone else?
Don't be afraid to speak up. You may not get the response that you hope for, and chances are you probably won't get the response that you hope for. But I would say speak up in a way that is safe, that leaves a relationship open for when somebody is ready to talk about it, but to not enable. I think the worst thing that the people who loved me, the worst thing that they did for me was rescue me. And there's helping people, and then there is rescuing people and not allowing them to reach their bottom. And I am so grateful for my stepmom for being no nonsense and not enabling me. I moved there, it was like, you are not getting away with this any longer, and I didn't. And that was the end. And I needed it.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, thankfully, your bad behavior didn't result in terrible tragedies. And sometimes, as you said, you were working with people that had terrible tragedies happen to them before, during, and after. Yeah. And so all the people in your world, it was not meant to happen. That terrible tragedy was not meant to happen. And I'm glad you didn't have to live through that.
Yeah.
How can people, if they want to get a hold of you, what are some ways, and we'll put some things in the show notes on how they can get a hold of you now. And then when your business is up and running, we'll update those show notes, because this podcast will live out there forever.
Yeah. I'm on all the social medias. If you search me, Kristina Pollard, and that's Kristina with a K, on Instagram and Facebook, I'm a resource. I would love to be help for somebody that needs a helping hand.
Oh, I'm so thankful that I got a chance to meet you, and I know that your work and your story is going to help other people. And thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And hopefully you'll be back in Nashville at some point in the near future, or I'll be out in Knoxville and we can go grab lunch or a cup of coffee.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristina. Thank you for listening or watching this episode. If something from today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to share this episode with someone who might need it, or take a moment to reflect on what stood out for you. You can find show notes wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoy the podcast, subscribing or leaving a review helps more people find these conversations. Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and remember, sometimes a small shift in perspective can change everything.